a good friend who was directing video games sort of came to me and said, you play games, you should talk to them. So I think like a week later, I had an interview with Ubisoft. They were looking for a director for, at that stage, I think it was the first Assassin's Creed game. We had a really good interview, at the end of which they basically said, well, we're not sure about you directing Assassin's Creed because you've got no experience. So we're going to give you Prince of Persia. Prince of Persia 2 Thrones, and basically you're starting in a week.
Welcome to Out of Frame, a Nerdy Filmmaker podcast, where I sit down with actors and creators from across the entertainment industry discussing the successes and struggles within their stories. My name is Julian Stamboulieh, aka the Nerdy Filmmaker, and today we are joined by Simon Peacock, a champion improv actor whose chance meeting with love moved him from New Zealand to Canada, eventually becoming one of the country's most prolific video game performance directors.
Oh,
yeah. Oh, no.
Not on the mic. Oh, it's off to a terrible
everywhere.
start. Cheers.
Cheers to you. What are you drinking?
I am drinking a blonde from Archibald with a coquettish secretary-type character, which is very advanced of the brewery to decide that's how to pitch a beer. You know, she's biting on her glasses, so we know she's thinking about something naughty. It's like, come on, really?
I'm drinking Sapporo. I got nothing to say about my can.
Yeah, I just ruined your sponsorship
Yeah.
possibilities there, didn't I? But hey, Archibald, do better.
Wow.
There you go. Calling him out.
So there's a lot to your story, my friend. I assume.
You'd be surprised.
And I'm excited to jump into it. And I would like to start by asking you about where you from?
I am from New Zealand, from Christchurch, New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I've heard of that place.
Yeah. It's been in the news for bad things in the last 10 years, unfortunately, but yeah.
Oh, boy. What was it like growing up there?
It was fine. I mean, when you grow up somewhere, you don't really know anything different, so you've got nothing to compare it to, but I was happy there. Looking back on it now, it's a relatively conservative town, sort of sprung out in the South Island of New Zealand, largely to serve agricultural communities around it. Mm-hmm. So, some of those values are in there for sure. It wasn't the easiest place to try and make a living out of the arts, that's for sure. Initially, I was going to be a lawyer, and then I gave up on that and went into the arts because I thought that's how you get your money. Yeah. You go to the arts and you don't do law.
When did you make that switch?
I was 2.5 years into a law degree.
I thought you were about to say I was 2.5 years old.
I was 2.5 years old, and I was going to be a child prodigy lawyer, like Doogie Howser MD, but for lawyers. If I can put the dated references in there right now. It worked out for him as an actor, but not so much for his patients. No, I had a couple of years at university, and then I just found law to be a little too repetitious for my likings. It's sort of about learning and just reciting what you've learned as opposed to necessarily creative thinking, and it just wasn't floating my boat, as they say. So
what area of law were you going to go into?
I was going to do criminal law because I'd watched a lot of TV and movies. Mm-hmm. See, that's where I made the mistake of which side of the TV and movies I wanted to be on. Yeah. But no, once you start getting into the weeds of a law degree, you start to realize it's not quite the way it's been represented before.
Truth.
Yeah.
Family-wise, were they supportive of this switch into the arts? Yeah,
as far as I know. I don't know what conversations were happening when I wasn't there. Because my parents were looking at the perfect set. They were going to have a guy in finance, a mechanic, and a lawyer. I mean, that was the rest of their lives taken care of, everything they needed. But now they have light entertainment taken care of instead.
That's funny. Yeah. That's a funny joke.
We're hoping they're laughing about it.
Oh, boy. So you have two brothers?
I do.
Okay, cool. And are they still in New Zealand?
They are.
Cool.
For legal reasons.
Uh-oh.
I'm the only one allowed to leave the nation.
Holy moly.
The nation asked me to leave. That's why.
Yeah. You annoyed them too much.
Yeah.
And so did you leave right after you decided to leave the law degree, or was it?
No, after leaving the law degree, I actually I ran off to work in radio, again, just looking for the high-powered careers. And I was working primarily as a copywriter, so writing commercials for the radio station. And then I sort of transitioned out of that into some other roles there, which included producing breakfast radio show, doing some little character voices for that, and sort of trying to make a living there. But at the same time, what I was really doing that was actually giving me joy in my life was I was doing improv at the same time.
Mm. At what point did you start improv?
Started improv when I was 16 in high school. And my drama teacher, Miss Rosanna Hallam, wonderful, eccentric woman, thought I had a skill for it and teamed me up with a bunch of guys that had already left my school that were at university and said, I'm going to put you together with these boys. I say boys because they were all boys, because it was an all-boys school. That's one of those moments where I can say absolutely 100% changed my life. The fact that she identified something in me and then put me together with a group that would become lifelong friends. and that I had more in common with than I think with pretty much any of my school friends at that time. And then it set me on a weird journey through improv that ultimately got me married and got me to Canada.
Oh my goodness! Don't
blow I'm not going to blow the surprise.
We've got another 60 minutes to cover here.
Stay tuned. It's going to be a great love story coming up.
Okay, cool. So you joined this. Was it a troupe? Was it a performing troupe? Or
it was run out of a place called the Court Theatre in Christchurch, which is sort of the one long-running professional theatre company, still going to this day. And so is the improv troupe. Initially, it was a thing called Theatre Sports, which came out of Calgary here in Canada, which was a way of doing improvised scenes sort of framed in the idea of putting on a competition. So you made it a little bit easier for an audience to get involved in it because there was scoring. If you had if you had a terrible scene, this is basically what the structure was there for. If you had a scene that sucked, it would get zeros from the judges and the audience will feel vindicated and not hold it against you.
Right.
It's like a purging. It's done. It was terrible. We all admit it. Let's move on. So it gave improv kind of a safety net. So when I started doing that, it was all sort of run through some sponsorship programs, and then that started in '86, and by 1990 we decided to form our own professional troupe out of that called Scared Scriptless in Christchurch, which also still running to this day. I think the longest running show in New Zealand, as far as I know. It's been going, 34 years now?
Are any of those original boys still in the troupe?
Not in that troupe, no. Some of them are still doing improv in various places, and they've all gone on to some interesting careers. Some as lawyers, in fact. Two of them are lawyers. One of them went on to run a whole bunch of arts festivals, and also worked as a producer at the Sydney Opera House, and those sort of things. We sort of scattered across the globe.
Well, I think that improvisation, which is not how you properly pronounce it, is a very valuable skill no matter which industry you go into. I think acting in general is, and this is coming from a math tutor of however many years I tutored math. I don't think that parabolas should be mandatory. I think theater should be mandatory.
It's interesting because now I work a lot in a different field. I won't say what it is because I don't want to ruin your surprise later on. No spoiler alerts. Which is made up of a lot of people behind the scenes who have worked their whole lives as individuals. And I've had this discussion with one of my audio friends about how difficult it can be to work with those people. Because in most of the cases, they've never done anything like theater or sports, which requires you to have the ability to take criticism, take it on board, deal with it, and make changes. As opposed to if you've just, sort of grown up doing your own thing, doing something that's completely individualized, and then suddenly in your adult life, someone comes up to you and says, you need to change this, this, and this, it's not working. We've seen some really, really crazy bad reactions to that kind of thing, which you don't get from people that, as you say, have done something like theater.
Yeah, especially also because it's any of those other fields are not as subjective, and it's accepting criticism when it's subjective is when you take it personally. Anything else is just it's either right or wrong.
It's subjective and it's something you've created as well, right? So it's really personal to you.
Yeah.
But if you've gone through things like theater, and I throw sport in there as well because it's the same thing, right? Because it's also subjective and it's also about skills and talents that you have, but you don't get good at a sport without taking criticism. And it's the same with theater and any of the arts.
Yeah. I mean, luckily, I've never needed criticism.
No, I mean, that's why no one would dare. I mean, your parabolas are unprecedented. I mean, I've never seen a parabolic curve like the one you have.
No. Very symmetrical. That vertex is on point.
Oh, vertex. That's a word I haven't heard in ever.
So how long were you performing with the troupe?
The troupe in New Zealand with Scared Scriptless, we started in 90, and I was with them until I left New Zealand in 95.
Okay. I know that you competed internationally with improv. Was it with that troupe?
Some of them were, yeah. The initial ones were, and the biggest one that we ever went to was called the LA Mug in Los Angeles. It was during the World Cup of soccer that was being held there, or football, depending where you're from, which we went to. I think there were 32 different improv troupes represented there, and we won that, which gave us a weird level of street cred back in New Zealand. New Zealand's a very small country, and anytime it gets any sort of international victory, suddenly it cares about it.
Nice.
Like, it's pretty we came back not knowing that anybody even knew what had happened, because why would they? It was just for people in their early 20s going off and doing something silly on a stage in Los Angeles. And we came back, we got off the plane, and there were film crews there waiting for us as we go.
Sick.
What the hell just happened? It was very, very odd. So suddenly everybody cared about improv for a little bit. And as a result of that, I was then able to go to another couple of tournaments. And the next one I went to was in Victoria, BC, and I went as part of a New Zealand team as opposed to just my local troupe. So,
Got it. So what ended up bringing you out of New Zealand?
that would be something called Jennifer Sagan.
Oh, tell us about Jennifer Sagan.
Where to start? 73 minutes, you said?
Yes.
No, it's not going to work. Jenny was part of the on-the-spot improv troupe in Montreal. And so she was at the same improv tournament I was in Victoria, BC, as part of the Commonwealth Games there. They had an arts festival. We met there. It was on my birthday. She was one of the first people I met with her fiery red hair and her sexy French, which for a New Zealander was very exotic. And yeah, she said, happy birthday to me. I think she said it in French first. And 10 days later, we got married there in Victoria.
Get out.
Yes. The legality of the wedding is debatable, that one, because we were largely hanging out at a pub called Steamers. So not that kind of steamer, in the nautical sense, as in a steamship. My understanding from my half a law degree, which is, that's all you need, is that a ship's captain can marry someone in international waters.
Oh my God.
So we assumed the pub was international waters, and we had the captain of, I believe it was the Wisconsin improv team, act as the celebrant. There weren't rings, but we had a lot of tequila instead. And like Jenny had found a secondhand store somewhere in Victoria and found a wedding dress. So she was wearing a wedding dress, and I had gone out and found a military op shop, or whatever you call them. And I bought a full US Marines dress uniform. So that was our wedding with ridiculous vows and all our improv friends around us. And then the next day we had to go our separate ways because we both had flights booked. And that was 1995, so 29 years ago.
Wow.
And we're still together now.
Jeez Louise.
Yeah. We did the more legal wedding a couple of years later when I moved to Canada.
Got it. Wow. That to meet someone and then know within 10 days.
Oh, we knew earlier than that. That's just how long it took us to find the clothes.
Oh my God.
That was just a costuming choice. It was great because I went home and I didn't tell anybody at home what I'd done. I just you want to see the pictures from the trip? Because this was back when you had to print up photos. Mm-hmm. That old. You couldn't just show them the phone or put them on Facebook or anything. You actually had to literally hand over physical copies of the photos. So anytime I met up, someone's like, yeah, how was your,
Here they go.
Take a look. You just seem to get to the wedding photos and you start getting a couple of little.
Is it a captain?
It's amazing my mother's still alive after that. That was quite the shock for her.
At that point, you basically know you're going to be coming to Montreal. Was there ever any question of her coming to New Zealand?
Yeah, we didn't know yet. We didn't really make those decisions to start with. I think we were apart for 3 months when Jenny was able to come to New Zealand to visit for the first time. And then and the period in between that, there were writing letters every day, phone calls when they could be afforded, because it was like $1,000 a month phone bills at that point. It was just crippling. And also little dictaphones were great. Like if I was riding my bike into my radio station, I would just be recording messages and ranting away. And then I'd post those off, and she was doing the same. So after 3 months, she came down to Christchurch, spent a month there. Then she had to go back, and then we sort of managed to find a way to get Just for Laughs to invite my improv troupe over. So I came for that, and then didn't go back afterwards. Yeah.
You just kind of like
stayed. Well, it's just because we're both working in comedy and both looking at having careers as performers. The possibilities of that were so much greater in Canada, and specifically in Montreal for comedy at the time, because Just for Laughs was such a huge force, especially back then. It's been watered down a little bit in the subsequent years, I believe, because other comedy festivals have come along as well. But back then, like if you wanted to get a deal, you wanted to get a TV show or anything like that, Just for Laughs was the place where that would happen.
Got it.
And we saw it happen for other people, but and I was able to fit in with an improv troupe pretty much straight away and gone from doing 1 or 2 shows a week to sort of 8 shows a week at the Comedy Works downtown Montreal. So in that regard, when we actually did think about it and talk about it, Montreal was the better answer.
Got it. So you move here. Do you move in straight together?
Yep. Straight into a 1.5 room.
Oh my!
We were poor.
Oh jeez.
So poor at the time. So if it's not going to work, it's not going to work when you're in a 1.5.
Yes. So you come here and you're doing your improv, performing 8 times a week. Are you also taking steps to start pursuing acting?
Not initially. Initially, it hadn't really occurred to me.
Okay.
Like, it's kind of a story. I don't think things ahead that much when it comes to my own life. Other things I will, but when it comes to my life, I just go where it takes me and see what happens. It's the improv in me. It's also, again, gift and a curse. So just sort of say yes to whatever's going on and then see what happens. But Jenny worked at an agency at the time, so I was aware of the opportunities that are out there and the possibilities. But then, of course, coming to Canada, you got to wait until you got your work papers before you can do any of that sort of thing. And then once you got your work papers, then you want to try and get into the union to see if you can actually start getting into the properly paid, legitimate work. And that took a while. Again, I got lucky in that regard as well because I fell into a show called The Wombles, which is a show that I grew up as a kid watching, which is really weird.
Fun.
It's a British show of little stop animation, they're like little, it's kind of a cross between a hedgehog and a ferret maybe. And it weirdly advanced for their time. They were conservationists who would recycle everything they found in the parks in Wimbledon Common. But anyway, they were remaking the show as a co-pro between the UK and Canada, and had logically decided we'll do everything in Canada, or we'll do everything in the UK except the voices. We'll do the voices in Canada, but they have to sound English because it's a quintessentially British show.
That's a
weird. Yeah, it's a weird choice, but that's how the tax breaks were being worked out, I think. So they needed people that could sound British, that would make the British people behind the show go, that's a Brit. And they hadn't found any in Montreal or enough yet that were union members, so I was allowed in as get my permits that way, and that was what got me enough permits to get into the union.
That's sick.
And from that point on, I was like, okay, this is what I want to be doing. This improv's great, but it doesn't really pay the bills. You're going to be struggling forever doing improv.
Yeah. How much were you making doing improv back then?
I mean, there were three of us. The Comedy Works, if we did like a middling set on the weekend, we're opening for a touring stand-up, it was $25 between the three of us.
Between the three?
Yeah. There was no money in that at all. The money we would make would be either, we headlined Tuesdays and Wednesdays. They were like our nights. So whatever came in at the door, we would split between the performers.
Got it.
And the occasional corporate gig, which is where you could charge, some decent amount of money, and then we had a share system so we could split it up amongst the troupe fairly so that it wasn't just dependent on who did that gig. But if you were doing the show at the Comedy Works, you'd also be making a share of the corporate shows as well. We were a very utopian viewpoint that way, but just try and spread the wealth around. But yeah, you weren't making enough money there to think this is my future.
Yeah. Okay, so you're on the Wombles.
Yeah. Bungo. I was Bungo.
Bunga?
Bungo.
Bongo.
Bungo, one of the Wombles.
Oh, fun. That was the first thing you did.
Yeah.
And at that point, it kind of like the bug bit you.
Yeah, the bug bit me, and it also showed me that I did have a skill set that not many other people here had.
Right.
Which is, New Zealand is essentially, at that point, still a colony of the UK. All of our entertainment was UK-based, pretty much. It's British TV shows that we grew up on, and just gave me a better ear for those British dialects and stuff.
I know that one of the things about Montreal is that everyone always assumes that people here have a French accent. There's a lot of talk about accents in film, let's say especially. Did you ever feel like you had to hide?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and, it's something that only once you've become comfortable and or I guess secure in your career is a point where you can sort of go, you know what, it. This is who I am. These are the dialects I'm comfortable doing. I'm not going to bother with the other ones anymore. Because I had auditions in Montreal where I'd go in and I'd spend all I was going to say all weekend, but how long did we have that much time with the script? Whatever time we'd had with the script, I'd spent most of it trying to make sure I had a standard North American accent that was going to pass. And then as soon as I stepped into the room, one of the casting directors would inform the producers in the room, this is Simon, he's from New Zealand.
Oh, come now.
So many times that happened, and it's just like, great.
Hello.
Thank you for planting the seed.
My name is Simon.
Sometimes your idea, right, and this is common with a lot of people with dialects that aren't from where they're auditioning for, is you put the accent on as soon as you open the door into the room, right? Hi, my name's Simon. Real pleasure to be here. Thanks for seeing me. It's that kind of thing. It's not who I am, but it's who they want to cast, and I don't want to give them reasons for doubt. That's why I was, annoyed in that previous story that they would say he's from New Zealand. It's like, great, you've just planted a seed of doubt in their mind. Yeah, they're now listening for an accent.
That's all they're listening for now.
Yeah.
Okay.
One of my particular favorites for that was when I decided there was a show that was being cast that was set in New York, and I decided I can't do a New York accent. Just can't do it. I'm going to do my accent. I've been to New York. There are people from everywhere in the world in New York.
Cool.
There's no bigger blend of accents than New York that I've ever been to. So I'm going to offer them a different flavor. And I was then told by the casting director, who had quite an accent at the time, why do you have an accent?
Why do you?
Yeah, to which I just replied, why do you?
Oh, throwing shade.
No, because we're both immigrants.
Yeah.
Right? And New York City has lots and lots of immigrants.
Yeah.
And then the answer was, well, can you do it without your accent?
Yeah. Did you get the role?
You won't believe this. No.
Oh.
No, that's the happy ending to that story. So I'm glad I took that moral stand. No, but since then, often I'll just look at things, and if it says, because the one I see the most is open to all ethnicities. It doesn't mean open to all dialects.
Right.
Because you'll show up to those sort of auditions, and I'll go, I'm doing my accent. Or I'm going to do an accent I'm comfortable with. And they'll be like, can you be more American? It's like, well, it doesn't say that.
People.
One day we'll all just be happy being who we are and having people of different places and sounds and looks. And,
Yeah.
it's good to dream. We'll have sexy secretaries just popping up who have dialects. She could have an accent.
What would her... Scottish?
Oh, definitely Scottish. Hello.
Hello there. This is my Scottish.
Oh, that's very good.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever done my Scottish for you, but now that you know I can do it,
why.
you can
I'm
cast me.
going to make a note of that. And I think the voice matches her quite nicely
Right.
too.
Hey,
All
hope you enjoy this beer.
Hello, can I get you a beer? I'll just be down here on this can. That's me. Oh, shall I take my glasses off? Aye.
Nibble.
Oh, aye.
Yeah.
Oh, is this coquettish? It's like, oh, come on. Archibald. Come on.
Okay, so what year was that? Wombats?
The Wombles.
Wombles?
That was probably like 97, somewhere in there.
97.
Yeah.
And so you continued to perform for the next, you're still performing today. But I think now you focus more on voice work, and we'll kind of get to that.
Yeah.
But were you pulled in one direction or the other in terms of voice work? I know animation was still very big in Montreal back then. And
animation was huge, and I think it gave a lot of hope to performers in Montreal, because for a while there was so much of it, and it was original voices, which is the one that pays the best. And you also get a back end on that as well. So people were seeing residual checks coming in a couple of years later for shows that were being shown all over the world. And there was a big production company here that seemed to be going gangbusters that everyone was very excited about. And then, as some of you may know, this little company was called CNR. They got caught committing all sorts of fraud. And I can say that because there have been criminal convictions for that. And they basically destroyed the entire animation industry in Montreal on the English side. They poisoned the well so much that nobody wanted to touch it.
wow.
Yeah. So it was a devastating time in the community in Montreal. And then we saw sort of the domino effect of all these other animation companies in the city go under as well, because they could no longer get the access to financing that they had previously.
Right.
Because they destroyed it.
Sucks.
So at that point, I was like, oh, I guess that's my voice career done, except for playing the Crocodile Hunter on Toyota commercials. But other than that,
Get out. That was you?
that was probably me. Australia has been very good to me since I left New Zealand. Oh my God. It really has.
You continued performing, but then you also started directing.
Yeah.
And was it solely just voice directing at that point?
Yeah, in Canada anyway, when I was working in the radio station, I used to do a bit of directing for the commercials I was writing, because it'd just be done with the DJs that you had on the radio station, or sometimes staff members there if you needed more of a cast, or you'd voice them yourself. So I had some experience there, and then I was artistic director of a couple of the improv troupes that I was a part of as well. So it sort of had a lot of the sort of formative ideas and concepts of how to direct sort of came through that and the way that I direct anyway. And then around 2006, I think it was, a good friend who was directing video games sort of came to me and said, some of the video game companies are finding that the directors they're using have all come from animation, and it's not the style that they're looking for in games. You play games, you should talk to them. So, okay, sure. Again, that's how I plan my life. Sure, yeah, let's do it.
That sounds good.
So I think like a week later, I had an interview with Ubisoft. They were looking for a director for, at that stage, I think it was the first Assassin's Creed game. I went in and interviewed for that with Patrice and a bunch of people there. We had a really good interview, and at the end of which they basically said, well, we're not sure about you directing Assassin's Creed because you've got no experience. So we're going to give you Prince of Persia. Prince of Persia, Two Thrones, and basically you're starting in a week. Which I did. So like on Monday morning, I started directing for the first time in a video game, having never directed a video game before. Very few people there with us. I think there was just one writer and the engineer. And the engineer I'd worked with a few times as a voice actor, so we had a good connection already. And a lot of it was just relying on him to make sure I wasn't messing things up too much. And again, thankfully, the improv background, I was just able to figure it out and improv my way through directing a game for the first time.
I find it interesting that they trusted you with Prince of Persia, Two Princes, which was before Sands of Time or after? It was after.
Yeah.
But not with Assassin's Creed, because that was the beginning of a new franchise.
It's a brand new franchise, brand new IP that they had, they'd spent a huge amount of money on. didn't already have a fan base going for
Yeah.
it, so there was no sort of built-in loyalty there, which I think with a title like Prince of Persia, they know it's going to be okay.
Okay.
It's already written. It's not saying it's a lesser game in any way, shape, or form. I think for them it was just a safer place to put somebody new.
That's what I was thinking, because like on the one hand, you might say like with a new franchise, a new IP, there's less expectations because the tone hasn't been set yet.
Yeah.
Whereas Prince of Persia already had fans that are potentially expecting a certain level of whatever. So I guess in my mind, it would have been the other way around.
No, for me that was easier because I was able to just go back and replay the other Prince of Persia games and go, okay, this is what they want from me. I know stylistically where it is. Now it's just a matter of me figuring out how I get performers to get there. And then with Assassin's Creed, actually, contrary to what you're saying, they knew exactly what they wanted from that as far as the tone was concerned. Patrice, who's the creative director, or was the creative director on the first 3 games and the creator of Assassins, had a really, really clear vision of what he wanted from that game.
Got it.
Yeah. And I ended up doing it anyway. So
You ended up doing...
Assassin's Creed, the first one.
You did?
Yeah.
Oh, why? Because they saw what you were doing with the other one? And
They saw what I was doing, and then the other person who was actually the same person that sort of said you should look at directing decided they didn't want to do it because video game directing was not what they wanted to be doing, so they were having doubts, and sort of they said to them, yeah, I don't want to. And then they're like, okay, you've done a good enough job on Prince of Persia. We'll bring you in for Assassins.
Holy moly. How long is a contract?
Depends on the game and how many lines you're recording. Those early Assassin's Creed games, there was a lot of recording time in those because this is before motion capture. So everything's recorded in the voice booth. Every single line of dialogue is just VO, no motion capture at all. So some of those early ones, like the first one I know we spent a month just in LA doing stuff there, and I think we probably spent 3 months in Montreal recording as well. And that's 2006, 2007. So that's quite a while ago. So as far as like memory capacity for games is concerned, that's changed exponentially since then. So games have gotten much bigger. So recording times have become much longer as well.
Got it.
In fact, most games now they can't record in the time frames they have. So we often end up having 2 or 3 studios running simultaneously.
Wow. How long did it take till you felt comfortable doing it? Or was it a very immediate thing?
I felt pretty comfortable pretty early on. I think a lot of that is just how much freedom Ubisoft gave me. Like they weren't sitting there critiquing and coming in and giving notes like you've done. We don't like this. We don't like that. There was always somebody there with me, and they largely just said, "Yeah, that's good," and they'd pipe up if there was something wrong. And if something was wrong, it was more about I had gotten context or the actual mechanics of a scene wrong, as opposed to they didn't like what I was doing with the performances. Right. So I got pretty comfortable with it pretty quickly. And I think that's that's another thing coming from the improv world. You get comfortable fast. Doing different things.
So you say you were a gamer.
Yeah.
First off, what games did you play?
Nowhere near as hardcore as you.
No, not many people are.
No. I grew up playing a couple of arcade games. It was things like Defender. I loved Defender so much. I spent so many 20-cent pieces. See, that's because I'm from a country that's 20-cent pieces, which means effectively games were cheaper for us.
Oh my!
Because you had to spend a quarter. We spent 20 cents at a time. Or did they change the amount of time you got per coin?
Here?
Based on how much your currency was worth.
No, I think
Question.
It depends how good you are.
Yeah, I wasn't very good.
No.
Yeah, I was never very good at any of the games I played.
Right.
But I just loved them. They fascinated me. And if I wasn't good at them, I would generally just stand beside the machine in the arcade and watch the people who were good at them. Like Dragon Slayer, classic. Fantastic.
Yes.
Fantastic game. You look at it now.
That's the 2D animated one there, right?
Disney did the animation for it, and it looks like a cartoon. There'd never been anything like it in video games before. I remember that coming to our local dairy, which is like a dépanneur in Montreal or a corner store anywhere else in North America. And the local dairy, and just standing there watching people play that game for hours, even though you look at it now, it's the simplest game. Yeah. You have a choice of, got 2 buttons, I'm going to press left or right, and a joystick. And people would be confounded by it. How do I get past this? And if you won, the game was like 15 minutes or something in its entirety.
That's how they used to make games longer, just by making them harder.
Yeah.
Go back and play some old Master System games. They're infuriating.
Just keep putting more coins in there.
And so, was there voice acting in that game? Or did you play games that had voice acting?
No, back then there weren't. Like, Dragon Slayer had some, what we'd call onos. There's just some little, that's it. Mm-hmm. No lines of dialogue in it. I think Berserker's the first game, technically, that had voiceover.
I don't know that one.
It was like the little robotic figures, side-scroller.
Sick.
Get him, eliminate.
Intruder alert, intruder alert. The humanoid must not escape.
I think there's 11 lines. I looked it up once. I think there's 11 lines of dialogue in the game or something like that, and it cost them about $110,000 to do it.
Huh.
Yeah, which is why at the time no one was going, let's put more voices in games.
Yeah. Because I grew up playing a lot of games. I had a Sega Genesis and a Nintendo, but I grew up playing a lot of RPGs, like Phantasy Star was my favorite franchise, but I also played a lot of Mortal Kombat. So growing up playing Mortal Kombat for me was probably like a lot of people that played Mortal Kombat. I didn't know I wanted to be an actor, but I knew I wanted to be involved with video games.
Yeah.
Where I dreamt of that. And so, I would always like do the moves and stuff. So,
Do that one more time. It's amazing.
It's basically as stiff as that. So my first time doing a voice for a video game, even though it's a mobile game, like it felt very much like a dream come true, even though I was in there for an hour.
Weirdly for me, it never was. Like I'd never made that association between I'm playing games and enjoying it, and then I'm an actor. I'd never had that crossover moment of like, one day I'm going to be working in video games. There's never a thought that had crossed it. And until suddenly someone said, I guess until I got my first voice gig doing, I think it was Splinter Cell, I think was my first voice gig in a video game.
Okay. Doing barks, like doing background characters?
No, I was the Irish safecracker, if anybody remembers that game.
Oh, sick.
That,
I don't, but that sounds cool.
That Sam had to come and talk to. No, grab the safe, kind of thing, Oh, you've got to hear it. That was one of those broad characters.
I'm not going to do my Irish.
It wasn't that bad. Is it like you're Scottish?
It's very similar.
Very similar.
It's pretty much
the same.
The same. So you were working with Ubisoft, and then as a director, and then there are a lot of other companies that are here. What were did things just start to pick up? Did people start to hear about you, or were there not a lot of other game companies here back then?
Initially, it was pretty much just Ubisoft. And honestly, initially, there weren't a lot of other voice directors doing games either. Like I found myself becoming almost full-time doing Ubisoft games. Because the multiple Assassin's Creed, there was also the Far Cry series was going then. We did some Rainbow Six games. I did the 2 Rainbow Six Vegas 1 and 2. I think it was Far Cry 2, Far Cry 3, somewhere around there. And then, there was an Assassin's Creed game every year to 2 years. And then eventually we got IDOS popped up in Montreal. And they reached out to me. I think I was really lucky to be here in that era and, like I say, being one of the few people doing it and that was interested in it. Other people were just sort of, if it came along, great, cool. Whereas I fairly early decided that was where I was going to stay. That was my lane. This is what I like doing. I'm going to stick in the video game and I'm going to, make sure I'm available for that kind of things. Because it does mean, it sounds awesome as an actor. I'm going to be a director, but at the same time, it means you're giving other stuff up. Like you can't continue to try and make acting your focus once you've decided to be a director, or if you want to be, really directing a lot. Because there's so many days where you're just not going to be available. Like so many times in that first year or so, I'd be getting calls for auditions. And be like, oh, I can make the audition excellent. And they'd be like, oh, what are the shoot dates? And be like, oh, no, I can't do that as well.
And so you mentioned, and correct me if I'm wrong.
You're wrong. It's just preemptive, just in case.
Video game performance, acting, had never really been taken seriously. I remember even playing games like the first Deus Ex. And even my mom had to come in the room and be like, what are you playing? Because the acting was so atrocious and racist that it was just god-awful.
Initially, those companies weren't hiring actors, right? No. They were all just using staff members. Yeah. So it was someone from their HR department, or it's the animators, or it's a couple of the producers just jumping behind a mic and thinking they're being hilarious. And a lot of the time they were, as you say, being really, really offensive.
Yep.
Like even go back and play the first Resident Evil. It's
which I did
atrocious.
Yeah, it's
the acting in it, as I've said to people this many times, if you gave me that acting today, I would have to fire you. Yeah. Not going to use it. It's horrible.
But what a brilliant game.
Great game, but that, which is an interesting side note, can be a great game with terrible performances. Yeah. But can you have great performances and be a terrible game? Will anybody buy it? No, not at this point.
Well, I think that I feel like, based off nothing,
cool.
That's
it's my favorite kind of argument.
The game that put video performance on the map is Far Cry 3.
Could be one of them.
The villain in Far Cry 3 played by
Michael Mando.
Montreal's
own.
Yeah.
Michael Mando.
Who went on to be on Better Call Saul.
Yep.
And one of the Spider-Man movies.
Yeah. But it was a great story behind that character. Like originally that character was, and this is a well-known story, so I'm not breaking any NDAs or anything. It's been talked about a lot. But Michael wasn't even considered for that role to start with. That role was pretty much a classic video game villain. It was going to be some guy who was just, 6'8", built, stacked, ripped, and just a big gruff voice and just really mean. They spent a long time trying to cast that role and just never found what they were looking for, never found something that would take that and make it interesting. And Michael had been sort of bugging his agent for months, just wanting to get in and audition for that role. And she'd been, to her credit, she'd been trying and trying and trying. And then eventually the team behind it just kind of got frustrated. They were like, let's see him. We don't have anything. So Michael went in there and just played it in a way that they hadn't even conceived the character, which is the way it is in the game. And then, got cast pretty quickly after that, and then they rewrote the character entirely to reflect what he brought to the audition room, which is a great story for actors, I think. To know that if you can come in with something really, really interesting and different, you can change, in that case, change a franchise, really. And he ended up on the cover of the game, right? It's his likeness, it's him.
Yeah.
It's nobody
else.
else.
Where the villain becomes the main character in a way, or the main selling point.
Yeah, the selling point, yeah.
And all the Far Cries, I haven't played number 6 yet, but like Far Cry 5, let's say, has 4 siblings, or roughly 4 siblings, and they're all unhinged. It's like he
created a new video game stereotype, kind of.
Yeah.
Certainly the Far Cry brand now leans heavily on that type of villain.
Yeah.
So trust your instincts when you're going into an audition and be persistent. The lessons there for actors might not work out, but when it does, life changing. I mean, it changed his life.
Yeah.
Because that role got him so much notoriety. And because video games aren't just played by gamers anymore. Like people who make movies and make TV shows play games and they notice performances in there. So someone played Far Cry and went, that guy's great. I want to see him for my show. Right?
Yep.
Changed everything.
I did a student film once.
With Michael Mando?
With Michael Mando.
Congratulations.
Yeah. But I was like 17 or something, or 18. I don't know. Must have been a little bit older. I was awful. But then I started the scene with him, and he was just like improving all over the place. But I didn't understand because I didn't know anything about on-camera acting. So I was just sitting there thinking like, this guy's the worst actor ever. He's going completely off book.
What the hell am I supposed to do? God damn it.
So you've directed a number of titles by now.
Yeah.
Across multiple different companies. You
mean now? By
now.
By now, yeah, I think I'm probably close to 100. Yeah.
Are there facets of it that you enjoy more than others? Obviously there is, but what are those facets that you enjoy more than others? Yeah,
increasingly I enjoy when I get involved in the motion capture directing as well, because that's kind of gone back to where I started with the Assassins when we got to direct the actual sort of meaty narrative scenes between characters. Some of the games I work on now, the voice director's largely just there to do the barks, which is all those sort of interactive lines that are triggered by what the player's doing, or they're just lines to make the world feel like it's alive. It's the person going, what was that? I heard a noise. Those kind of lines. That can get a little tedious, honestly, obviously, because you're just recording the same sort of things over and over and over and over again. So anytime we get a chance to actually, work with the actors and just try and find, the right beats in a scene and watch the arc and work on the character and stuff, that's always more fulfilling. Let's put it that way. It's more fulfilling work to do.
Right.
Than just, the sort of more formulaic parts of the game. They're mechanical, I guess is a better word.
Is there a game that you've directed that is, for you, like the favorite thing that you've ever directed, either because of its experience or because of your pride in the quality of work?
There's a couple. Like one of the ones I found really enjoyable to do was one of the more recent ones was Guardians of the Galaxy, which I was not the main director for. I'm not going to take credit for that. I didn't do any of the cinematics. That was Daryl, who's fantastic. And Daryl was doing most of the VO, but at some point they just realized the workload was so huge. They brought me in. I think I did like the last 5 weeks of just some of the banter between the cast. And that was fun for me to do because it's one of the only games I've worked on that has been deliberately funny, right? Plenty of games end up being funny inadvertently, but their goal was to write comedy, and to actually get the chance with a comedy background to come in and direct comedy was great. That felt really good. And they were just really smart about the way they did it. Like they made sure that jokes didn't get repeated. They'd feel it out. They were open to change on the day of doing it and changing, finding a more effective way to make the joke work for the characters or the actors that were in there in the room. So that was one of the most fun ones to work on for that reason. One of the ones I'm still the most proud of, it's the follow-up to the Deus Ex you were talking about, not the Deus Ex you were talking about. That was terrible acting, I hope. It was the first Deus Ex that we did in Montreal, just because it was a really big project, and unlike a lot of the other games, almost the entirety of it was cast in Montreal, like the leads, which was fantastic. I think we brought in 1 or maybe 2 actors from outside of Montreal. Yeah, and then I liked the work that we did was good. I thought it was a really good script, really interesting sort of concept behind the game. The one after that was a little more frustrating just because we didn't get to finish the story. for a lot of reasons. So that was, a little disappointing. But that one I really enjoyed. And like I said, just the pride of so many Montreal performers in it doing great work. And as someone that, advocates for the Montreal community, that made it special to me.
Oh, what a great segue. Advocating for the Montreal community. Oh. You also sit as the president of
ACTRA Montreal.
ACTRA Montreal. What did you say?
I said I do.
Oh, okay. I thought you were saying like, don't.
I quit. That's it. I'm out.
You sit as the president of ACTRA Montreal. This is now your second term? Third term.
Yeah, because I had one pre-COVID. Yeah, third.
Mm-hmm. So you are working to better the working conditions, all the circumstances revolving around being a unionized actor.
Yeah.
And how is that, first off, how has that been on you and your life and your workload, but also how has your experience as a director as well come into play?
Workload-wise, it's been a lot, honestly. The position changed enormously when COVID happened. Like up until that, I wouldn't say it was a figurehead position, but certainly you were the public face of the union and you sort of ran our council and those kind of things. But the workload wasn't enormous, which is great because it's a voluntary position, as are all the Montreal council positions for all the people that are sitting there, like Julian, for example, is on there as well. Thank you, Julian. Thank you for your service. Then when COVID hit, it became a much, much more involved role. Like many organizations, we had to try and find ways to survive. We had to lay off staff, which meant a lot of the people that are involved in the day-to-day workings and decision-making weren't there. So a lot of those responsibilities fell on myself and our executive and, working with the leadership that remained. And then, our staff, a lot of our staff at that point sort of had been with ACTRA for a very, very long time. Like we had a couple of people that were 40 plus years. Mm-hmm. And then sort of seeing the layoffs and then seeing that they weren't probably going to be coming back into the office and working that way again. They're going to have to learn how to work online, all that sort of thing. Sort of quite, I think, reasonably decided it's time for me to retire. So we lost a vast amount of experience in the workplace. So then as president, kind of felt like you have to have that continuity. Someone that's been there for a while and understands the way that our office works and we relate to our members. So that was why I ran for the third term, was just to make sure we had that continuity there and keep things ticking over. And then, and again, as everybody's found out there, finding new staff is really hard in this environment. And, we've had a couple more people leave for other reasons. And then, so we haven't been fully staffed since COVID hit. So that's, some more of that work's fallen on my shoulders, which work-life balance hasn't been ideal. But you do what you got to do, right? If you're willing to volunteer for these positions, then you have to be willing to do whatever it takes to fulfill that role. I don't think you can bail on it. So, it has been an enormous amount of work, but there's also, you get a lot out of it most of the time, not always. Most of the time you get, satisfaction of making sure that the people and that you work with and the community that you love is being protected. Mm-hmm. That's pretty fulfilling in that regard. But as far as being a director, crossing into that, I think it just, if you're directing things like video games, they're pretty complex and you've got to have a fairly organized way of thinking. And you also have to be kind of part-time psychologist, where you understand what people are saying, whether or not they're saying it out loud or not. Learning how to read an actor's body language and performance and stuff and figuring out what's working, what isn't working. Also, I think is good for people skills when it comes to dealing with a council and with staff and also with members in general, like just being able to figure out what it is that they're actually trying to say to you. Because sometimes it's not what they are actually communicating, mm-hmm. right? Like a member being angry and shouting at you isn't always about what they're yelling at you about, especially during the COVID times. A lot of it's because of just they're under a massive amount of pressure and anxiety and, life is fucking awful for a lot of people at the moment. Or especially back in the height of it. And it was just like trying to make sure that you realize that was really what this was about and do what you can to help them and to lessen that anxiety. Yeah.
And I think like actors, we all complain to each other and we all whatever, about work and this and that, but we don't really have a scope of what's happening in the city because we don't see numbers. We don't see whatever. Yeah. And, I think it's, I think you are right in would agree that, like, yes, it's been a very hard few years for a large subsection of actors.
Incredibly hard. I mean, the amount of pressure and work that's been put on the average actor the last 3 years is unprecedented. You know, it's a corny word. I hate using the word unprecedented because it's being used so damn much in the last 3 years. But, you know, like, think about self-tapes. We didn't have to self-tape prior to the pandemic. Suddenly, not only did we have to self-tape, but we also had to invest in the right equipment. It had to be up to certain standards, and then we had to learn how to submit to, you know, every different casting agency wanted submissions in a different way. And so what used to be all we had to do was learn our lines and find a way to perform something in a great way. Suddenly we had to do that, but we also had to think about lighting and sound engineering, and we had to make sure that we were doing the right editing job to it, and then we had to have the technical skills to deliver it on time and in the right formats and stuff. And it's just a huge amount of pressure, whilst at the same time just dealing with the general human pressures of the pandemic, you know, of not knowing if your family was going to be okay or not being able to leave your house, you know, having curfews here in Quebec, all that kind of stuff, just huge amount of anxiety on your shoulders in and of itself. And then to have your work environment shift so radically, and not just with the work itself, but the costs involved in that as well. Like, you know, we're precarious workers in the Actors Union. We don't have long-term gigs very often. We don't have a steady paycheck. We don't get sick pay. So if we get COVID and we lose a gig, we lose a gig. We're never getting that money back again. You know, it's a different place to be in than it was for a lot of people. So that stress and that extra work was just really, really taking a toll on people. And I think we were always very well aware of that and trying to find ways to communicate with members. You know, and honestly, we also have members that are on both sides of the debate, which doesn't help either, right? Everything's so polarized and you're either this or you're that. So, you know, you have camps within the union that are being labeled as anti-vaxxers, and then you have the ones that don't think we can have enough vaccinations and enough testing. And somewhere in the middle, the union's supposed to be representing both parties, right? And finding that pathway forward without ostracizing either side or putting extra stress on there. And, you know, I don't know if we managed to achieve that. I know there are people at either extremes that are almost definitely going to tell me that we didn't help them enough. But we were definitely trying our damn hardest to figure out what we were doing and try and find a way to keep our members safe with the knowledge that we had. Because that was, I mean, it's easy too. Like, people look back on it retroactively and say, well, that was stupid. You shouldn't have done that.
Like,
this doesn't work. We didn't know. Yeah. Nobody knew, right? And we're all just trying to figure out the least likely to do damage.
And it's also navigating that middle ground within the laws that have been put in, and not only the laws, but the rules put in by things like insurance companies and all this kind of stuff that really limit.
Yeah, and that in Quebec is one of the biggest places that it came from, right? They wouldn't insure a film set if people weren't vaccinated and had proof of it, and then testing as well. Yeah. But we're seeing those restrictions removed slower in Quebec than we are in other parts of the country, which is something we have to sort of talk about as well and address. Yeah.
Okay, so I would love to go back to the voice directing for a little bit.
Sure.
And I know that a lot of people dream of being in video games. In Montreal, it's very hard to make it as a film actor because there's no like aspiration, like there's no top goal present here. All actors who are the leads of films are brought in from elsewhere. But Montreal is known for its video games.
Yeah, hey, we're top 5 in the world for video game production.
Yeah, behind or alongside who?
Oh, you're going to make me remember these again. London, Tokyo, Los Angeles, and the one that no one ever believes, Austin.
I believe it.
Last time I checked, anyway.
I believe it. Yeah. There's a lot of game studios there. Yeah.
Yeah, but people outside of the gaming world, anyway, put it that way. Like, Austin? What's Austin got? It's got tax credits. That's what it's got.
Got it. And so I know that there's always this attempt to try to find new actors and all this kind of stuff for video game work. You even run through ACTRA, help run and designed a video game training workshop for unionized actors. But is there a struggle for new actors to find their way into the gaming industry? Because I also know that, and I'll say this, is that other than dubbing, video gaming is the only one that has its own technical skill associated with it, specifically mocap. And dubbing has, the Rhythmaband, which is basically just like a jukebox karaoke. Yeah. But you got to learn a whole new skill set. So for actors who are trying to get into video games, what can you say towards that?
It's the most open to new talent.
Okay.
I'd say absolutely without a doubt. But but that doesn't mean you'll get in, right? Because there's always that assumption of I want to do this, I'm going to do it, I will do it. Not necessarily. It's going to take a ton of work, and also I think almost every time it's going to take a little bit of luck. Because there are lots and lots of talented actors that never got the big break, and it's not because they didn't have the talent. I always feel like there's a little bit of luck in there. Sometimes talk about it as being like buying a lottery ticket, and your talent gives you the first 2 numbers, right? And then hard work gives you another number, and then getting training, like experiencing what motion capture is, gives you 1 more number. Yeah. But you're still 2 numbers short, right? Yeah. Which depends on the people that are in the room when you audition that day or on the self-tape and what it is exactly that they're looking for. Right. Because they very rarely can communicate to you what it is they're looking for. I mean, the Michael Mando story from earlier is the classic example. He was absolutely 100% not what they were looking for until they saw it, right? So that can make it hard to get your foot in the door. That was a persistent agent and their own inability to be happy with anybody they had seen. So that's some of the luck again, right? But if you're willing to put in the work, like video games, back when I started initially, and as you said, it wasn't really taken all that seriously by actors. It used to drive me crazy. People would come in and audition for a video game, and you'd ask them if they've ever played a video game, and they'd say no. You ask them if they've ever, have you watched clips of video games? No. It's like, you would never go in for a TV audition for a series and not watch an episode of that series first as a professional actor. You want to get a sense of the tone. And if you're auditioning for something from, let's say, Ubisoft here in Montreal, there are thousands and thousands of hours of their material online on YouTube that you can watch and get a sense of what their stylistic approach is for performances. So that you can go in already, halfway ahead of anybody else. Like, I know what it is that they generally like. Yeah. The generally is the part that's also important, because they're NDA'd to the, you don't even know sometimes they're auditioning for a video game. Yeah, that's happening less and less. Like, a lot of our collective agreements with them sort of specified now that they need to be a lot more clear about what it is. Because, there are also people that consider themselves just to be film actors that don't want to audition for a video game. And that's fine. So then they go in and it's like, well, what is this? You're messing with people by lying to them by what it is that you're auditioning for, right? Yeah. If you're doing it that way, you're not going to get the right people necessarily. So they're being a lot better about it. But, again, it's just, if you know the industry and you do your research, it's pretty obvious if it's a video game in Montreal by the like you were saying before, the size of the role and the scope of the project. Like, you're seeing a sweepy, an epic that spans centuries, based loosely in this section and this section of history. There's clues that we can go, that's a video game. I mean, I know whenever I get a video game audition, I sit there and speculate. And I'm sure all actors who are also gamers, we sit there and speculate. We look up the roster of games from the past, whatever. I'm just like, I wonder if it's this. I wonder if it's that. We try to find. Yeah. Like the Guardians auditions, I remember when those were being run. I don't think we really went in for that, figured that out pretty quickly. I went into audition for that. Yeah. And it was pretty obvious if you had a clue. But again, that's just about being informed, right? So if you're thinking, I'm going to be a video game actor, that's what I'm saying. You need to understand the world of video games. Yeah. And if it's Montreal that you're going to be auditioning in, learn the Montreal industry. If it's Los Angeles, then figure out what games are being made there. Wherever your market is, find out which companies produce locally so that you can concentrate on figuring out what their style is, so that you can give them something that's already in their ballpark and that's palatable to them. And then that's when, as an actor, your job is to give your own choices to it and bring your own flavor. Right. And bring them some surprises. Don't just make it really straight ahead and simple and obvious. Because everybody's going to do it the same way. I've watched thousands of video game auditions now, and 90% of them are the exact same thing. Do something with it. Bit of a tangent, but I wonder about, there's a lot of talk about AI right now, obviously, because as Philip DeFranco puts it, this is the worst AI will ever be again. Yeah, sadly. But also the most controllable AI will ever be, or the most stoppable AI will ever be. So how do you see that finding its way in a positive or negative way into our industry? Whether it's positive or negative is largely up to us. And I think now is the crucial moment in doing that. We've already had it brought up to us by companies about trying to find ways to put it in that we can live with and that they can live with. As the scope of games is becoming bigger and bigger, now we have open world. Back in the days, the games were linear, so they're only we're going to go this way the entire game, so this is all the environment we need to build. We know any time that you're going to run into another character, so we only need this many lines of dialogue. Now, if you go open world, player can go anywhere, so every single part of this giant map must now be completely interactive. Every character has to be, have lines of dialogue in case you can stop and do things with them, all that kind of thing. So it's become huge, and I know for some games companies that's becoming cost prohibitive. not just financially, but also in terms of the amount of time that it takes to do all of that. So that's where I think we already are hearing from games companies about that's where they see AI coming in first, is helping to flesh out some of that backgrounds thing. So they're not talking about replacing performers when it comes to things like cinematics, which are for those who don't know games very well, it's like the little movie parts of games that are in between gameplay that sort of do most of the narrative heavy lifting. For those sort of things, you need actors there. You need that idiosyncratic thing that an actor can bring that an AI system at this point can't, right? We're going to make weird little decisions, not decisions based on patterns, which therefore means logic and predictability. Humans don't work that way generally. So for now, we're protected there. But I mean, other things like all that motion capture of people just moving around in the backgrounds in video games, that's, it's hard to imagine we're not going to be replaced in that regard. Because they can already just take bits and pieces of different motion capture, performances and put them together and make pretty much any movement. Yeah. So it's going to be a part of it. I think it's just a matter of hoping that the AI is just sort of a supplement to what we do and not a replacement. Because my thing with AI, and I've said this to a few people, what annoys me about AI at the moment is it seems like the focus is replacing people who are doing something they love, not on replacing people who are doing something they hate or doing the work that nobody else will do, or filling in the gaps that we have in a workforce, where we're horribly short of people, like let's say nursing and doctors in that medical field. We can't get enough people trained well enough. That's somewhere where it's like, surely there are some parts of that AI can take over, even if it's just the bureaucratic side of things, not the diagnostic. Why replace artists? Why are we the ones they want to get rid of first, it seems like, with AI? I don't understand that. We all want to be doing what we're doing. We love it. We don't want to be replaced. Very few of us are in it for the money. We don't make huge amounts of money, so we're not a huge cost saving in that regard. So why are they coming for us first?
I hate artists.
That could be it.
That would be it.
It's also true. You have that T-shirt too, don't you? You got to start wearing that to meetings. Terrible first impression.
Well, on that positive note of our futures being disrupted.
You said you wanted to go dark.
I did. I want to thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I hope everything is great for you from now on.
From now on, after those terrible things that have happened to you. And I for you.
You want to go eat?
Sure.
What do you want to eat?
What are we looking at?
There's a bar next door.
Done.
Let's go eat the bar.
Done. See, I told you I just go with whatever people suggest. Here I go again.
Thanks so much for watching today's interview. If you want to check out the rest of them, head to the Out of Frame playlist. And if you want to support the channel, make sure you subscribe and like and leave a comment, share with a friend, all the usual stuff. So thanks again, and I'll see you at the next one.